is that I would see the extension educators as kind of an informant, if you will, on selecting sites, because they're embedded at a local level. They may not know every little nook and cranny, but they probably have a better understanding than we would, just as grant recipients that have this wonderful idea about engagement. So I mean, these are the people that are on the ground, and they understand local networks and so on. So they would be advised. Yeah. They could advise on that. So
that's a great idea.
I keep raising and dropping because I'm not sure.
I thought I saw something over here. I keep looking, and then it's not there.
Because I'm not sure if I have a question. All of these answers have actually helped clarify a lot. Because at the end of the talk, my really big question was, what's the ultimate goal? And so I think maybe I had a kind of confusion because you compared it with deliberative democracy at the end, that we're looking for a better, worse, best sort of thing. And so I think you helped clarify that now. But now my confusion or question got pushed back a little bit. And so I'm still kind of wondering what the ultimate goal is. Because then I thought, oh, he gave me an answer. He said something like, because then we know how to put educators into the community or something like that. Or,
well, you know enough to be able to do things in relationship to that community that fit that community, whatever that happens to be.
Yeah, and so in my background, again, comparing with the deliberative democracy setup that you had at the beginning, I'm thinking, oh, so now we can communicate with them better, so maybe they can participate better, and then we get a better outcome if we think there's something ethically important about letting people contribute in politics or something like that. But then if that's your ultimate goal, then it actually sounds like we are doing deliberative democracy, but in a kind of long way around. So there's a whole mess, and I'm sorry. But
no, that's okay. There's a preface I gave to this talk when I gave an earlier kind of smaller, more compacted, simple version to it at the NSF thing a few weeks ago. And I suppose I should have given that preface here. I am not a crusader. I'm not a paladin. I don't have a holy cause. I'm not a mercenary. I consider myself a conscientious facilitator. So when you ask, well, what's the ultimate goal? It's like I'm supposed to have some broad, great social cause that drives all of this. I don't. I actually, if anything, just have an incredible amount of hope that just by virtue of walking into the existing spaces, working with existing spaces, paying more attention to the existing locales, existing modes of communication, that we're going to understand and communicate and deliberate, have conversations, and engage people in ways that are going to be far more enlightening and far more interesting and far more useful for other people's projects, whatever they may be. But I'm not out to save the world, right? So if you want the big goal up here, my answer is I don't have one. I don't feel a need for one. I don't have the big goal up here. I'm really happy with just kind of a lot of little small micro goals in here. And that mobilizes and facilitates me really well.
So maybe given all that, then even the backup soft version is unfair because maybe it's the same answer. But I mean, if that's what would make you happy is to at least see this aided communication and this sort of thing, then is it at least fair to say, I mean, you have a reason for doing this, and it seems like there has to be at least something like, because that kind of communication is valuable or something like that, which would give us one way to distinguish you from the deliberative democracy folks, because you're looking at some kind of intrinsic value of, look, talking with people is good, as opposed to, instrumental value towards getting us a better political decision or something.
The alternative way to put that might be that I have a deep political and ethical suspicion of idealized models of participation. So the idea that you're going to have people participate and that you're going to have people engaged and so on, I'm very suspicious of models that ground that in an idealized vision of what that's supposed to or has to look like, particularly when local communities have been extraordinarily good of having their own mechanisms and methods for coming to opinions and engaging in deliberation and so on. So valorizing something of that kind of local knowledge and local method indicates a way to diminish the kind of influence that very idealized, these very Habermasian, counterfactual but normative structures that I talked about at the beginning that have guided the deliberative democracy movement, to kind of give an alternative mechanism for talking about how we actually do engagement, how we actually do these. I mean, if this is important to us, if this is what we want to be able to do, have participatory kind of regulatory schemes, have engagement and so on, let's talk about finding a way to do it that doesn't impose this idealized, rather singular vision of the ways and means in which that has to happen. So if you ask if there's an ethical and political suspicion that drives us in the background, yeah, but I don't have a telos for that. There's no end goal of what that's supposed to look like, except for sort of these very small kind of micro elements of moving away from what I see very uniform and very, really kind of culturally uniform structures of what it means to engage and deliberate, to things that are particularly more localized and particularly more fluid.
Pat, can I jump in on this? I see my project, our USDA extension project, and what you're doing is very closely aligned. I'll depart a little bit here to say that I do have an axe to grind, and I'll define that axe in terms of philosophical principles that are guiding what I do, and I'll rank them in kind of a first order, second order criteria. First order criterion is clearly one of it's an egalitarian philosophical principle that focuses on participatory equity, and I think that what you've described really, by opening up the spaces and identifying those spaces, it gets at this EJ issue, and this gets back to your question about how do you evaluate it. If the principle that's guiding this is an egalitarian or equity kind of a principle, then you can actually look at whether or not there are measures of marginalization in the participation process. Now, as a second order criterion, then you can begin to look at utility. That's not what I'm particularly interested in, but I too have this hope or this belief that greater participation from a broader section, a more inclusive cross-section of spaces and of populations is going to lead to a better kind of an outcome, be it in terms of distribution of benefits and costs and these kinds of things. So for me, it's very, I feel very much grounded in an egalitarian equity-based principle that kind of motivates and drives everything that I do on this. So I part with you a little bit on that, but I'm going to want to be transparent about it. That's job one in my particular motivation.
And even though John and I wouldn't share this, that is to say the absolute groundwork on which that's built, there's a lot of stuff going on up here in which I think that the work that we're interested in doing meets very well, and we don't need to negotiate the foundations to work together up here.
That's what I was going to say. It seems to me one can retreat quite a lot from egalitarian equity and just use the term respect. Right. You don't have to be weighing these things, but you do have to pay attention to where people are.
You can keep going until somebody sits in one of those green chairs.
Pat, I really like what you've done thinking through this. I think you've done a masterful job. And I don't think the question I'm going to ask is really that important, but isn't there something irreducibly artificial when you introduce the topic of nano into these settings where it's never been a topic of discussion?
Exactly. Yeah, like I said, this is not a non-intervention concept, right? It's a minimal intervention concept. If the question is, how might or would public perception of risk and public opinion form around these things, there's going to have to be that move. The question is, how do we introduce it in a way that's as naturalized to that ecology as possible? So you're right. The idea that some groups might have a conversation about it at all. And I think this is actually, I've kind of struggled with this, is, you want a minimal amount of guidance in terms of what you ask the group to do. Like, I would not want to ask a group to come to consensus. If it's their norm to come to consensus, they will. If it's their norm to allow for dissension, they will. All right? So what happens if you go into a group and you say, here's the stuff I'd present, and I'd like to just kind of sit in and listen to how you all interact about it. And they're 5 minutes into talking about it, and somebody mentions that their daughter just had a baby, and they spend the next hour talking about the new birth. That tells us something. Like